My name is Joe McClure. I'm a co-director of the RCFI focused on on-farm research. You'll be hearing a little bit from myself and as well as Roger Wolf, a co-director also for the RCFI on the conservation, implementation, and cropping systems side of the organization, putting plans into action. So with that, I'll kick off here. We're going to talk today about building a plan. And so one thing, quick introduction about ISA. We feel we're a pretty unique organization. Hopefully a lot of you already know who we are and interact with us routinely. But we have an organization focused on innovation, built up between three strong portions of the organization, between analytics, the on-farm research side, as well as our cropping system and conservation implementation team. And all that together, we're tied together with a singular purpose, improving the productivity and profitability and sustainability of Iowa farmers. And that holds us together, and it gives us a drive to deliver every day. So what we're going to be talking about today is a little bit of engagement, about having a plan and building a plan and then following that plan and putting that into action, and then looking at the results and then circling back around and building another plan and continue to advance small incremental improvement steps that we want to help people with in order to, again, increase productivity and profitability and sustainability of your farm. So with that, we want to introduce a system called Plan, Do, Check, Act. It goes by many names, but what it is identifying problem or an opportunity, identifying what the risks are to that, and what your end goal is. And then you go from there, and you take that step, the first step. It's not the entire steps, all the steps. It's just what are the first steps to do to achieve that goal, to seize that opportunity. And then you start collecting data, whether it could be visual, it could be you actually could be measuring something, it could be performance of a piece of equipment, whatever that might look like. And then as you learn from that, you make adjustments, you see how things work, make adjustments, and you go back around and make your second iteration of your plan, and you continue to do the cycle, and you do small increments and learn from your process to make incremental change to whatever you're looking to do. Real world example that I thought about is around nitrogen use. We could talk about cover crop implementation. We could talk about yield increase in soybeans. I thought the nitrogen piece was a pretty easy one to explain. So if my goal was to reduce nitrogen rate on my corn acres by 30 pounds per acre, if you kind of follow the black text along, so the first thing I might do is install an experiment or two to look at nitrogen rates on my farm, and also to move 30% of the nitrogen to the in-season application rather than maybe purely fall applied. Maybe I've been doing that before. So going through implementing those actions, I would review the results. I would review whether I had the capability to cover all my acres with side dress toolbar. Do I have that capability? Did weather get in my way? What were the risks? What were the problems? And then I would assess, is it the right equipment? Do I have the right process? Do I want to bring some nitrogen onto the planter since I'm already covering those acres at that time? And I'd go back around, and my example here, my second iteration, I would explore new equipment because maybe I wasn't able to get across all my acres in time in order to put 30% of that nitrogen in season application. And then I would install that equipment and as well as do another comparison, another experiment. Do I like side dress? Do I like wide drop? What's the right result for me? What's the right equipment? And I'd keep going. I review the results, profitability, see how that worked. If it's working, I'd maybe go on and say, okay, maybe year 3, I want to move 20 pounds to my planter, and continue to do experiments to test things out, and slowly go from maybe that 40-acre field next to my farm where I can monitor it to more and more of my acres further away. So it is a planned, systematic approach to achieving success, to achieving your goal. And it's something you do every year. This is just a way to formalize it a bit and really look at those actions. The planning phase is the biggest phase. It's 40 to 50% of the entire time is around planning. A good plan will yield success in the field or success whatever you're doing. A quick plan that's not well thought out or maybe didn't take into consideration all the risks is more likely to fail. So taking your time on the planning side is the key portion of that. With that, I'll hand it off to Roger and to share a little bit more about this.
Well, thank you, Joe, and welcome everybody. Really glad that you're here. Obviously, we would have preferred being in person back in February, but obviously the weather don't have control over that. So play it safe and use technology to our advantage. As Joe said, here at Iowa Soybean Association, we think we're unique, and how I think we're unique is everything that we're talking about in terms of building a plan. We actually apply that here at the Research Center for Farming Innovation. We're trying to figure out how can we best engage the farmers that we serve and work for, and put a leadership proposition in front of all these issues, particularly on production, management efficiency, producing that crop, and profitability, which drives at the heart of what we do here at the Research Center for Farming Innovation, and it's special about Iowa soybean. So making engagement work for you. The best way to do that is, yes, we want to share our learnings and make you aware of all these things. And every year we have a conference event to share these things, but we really need to hear from folks out in the field. And so what's really the engine of RCFI is all about engagement, and engagement of having farmers directly involved. One way that we get that engagement is for you to have a conversation with us and tell us, what are you interested in? So on this slide, and you see that QR code up there in the corner. If you take your phone and you highlight that, that'll take you to our website. And I would encourage you to do that and fill out this form on the website. It's electronic, and take a look at all the things that you might have interest in. And as you're building out your action plan, and this is a theme that we had for the conference in February, and it's a theme we're trying to apply here today. All the presentations you're about to hear are geared to how farmers have been actively engaged, the steps that they have been taking, the results of the information that they have been learning over the years, and then what can we do with that information. And so obviously we want other farmers to take advantage of those learnings and think about how to engage. So, and then I see there's a chat that just came up, and I want to remind people, as you have questions, to go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll keep recording those, and staff will be able to come back and try to answer, but be sure to use the chat on the technology here. Next slide, Joe. So this action plan, if we were live and in person, you would have had a paper version of this in your person at February, and this idea of coming up with your goal, and remember, going back to the Plan, Do, Check, Act, defining that goal. What is that nugget that you want to work on? And it could range from all kinds of things, and Joe gave a nice example, but leadership and advocacy plays into that. Really anything that you want to make progress on. So, but then picking out those next steps and defining that action, trying to figure out the timeline on when, and then who can support you. And I will tell you, the staff that we've assembled here under the Research Center for Farming Innovation, we are assets we want to be available to you. So one of the things we're trying to convey today is we need to hear from you. We need to hear how can we best help you, and how can you help move the soybean industry forward. That's a big part of why we exist, and so proud to work on behalf of Iowa soybean farmers. Okay, next slide, Joe. So this is that staff that I talked about. And by the way, you're going to have these slides. We're going to share these slides, so you'll have these phone numbers and emails. And I know a lot of people online know these things, but really, we really want to have a two-way conversation and hear from you, because we want to really make progress on that uniqueness here at RCFI. Okay, next slide. So a little bit about our agenda. We're going to jump in here in a few minutes. Agronomic practices to enhance field performance and increase profitability, and advances in cover crop protection. We're going to have, during the break here, there's also going to be a video. We hope we have a video. We'll see how we do on timing, but we hope to have a video that describes some of the things that we're working on across Iowa in terms of our Front 40 campaign, research and conservation opportunities, tremendous opportunities available to Iowa farmers. Probably at least in my career of 33 years working in conservation, there's been no better time than right now for farmers to take advantage of conservation opportunities and incorporating them on their farm. And then we'll come back, we'll close out, and I'll remind you about setting that action plan. Okay, next slide, Joe.
With that, we're going to hand it off to Ryan and Matt. So I'll unshare here, and Ryan and Matt work in our organization. Ryan is a conservation agronomist, and Matt is our research scientist in charge of analytics team. So I'll hand it over to them.
So we'd like to kind of talk about what we'll learn today, diving a little bit in on cover crops. But I did want to let everybody know that there is CEUs available if you're a CCA. So if you want to put your name and your CCA number into the chat, or I will have a QR code that you can scan at the end of my presentation here. So with that, I wanted to start with what is the most important metric of farming? You know, there's a lot of reasons why people farm, and what are you striving for? You know, are you striving for that high yield? Are you striving to grow more acres? You know, grow as much as you can. Are you striving to be environmentally conscious? Do you have a conservation behind you of, hey, I want to adopt this on my farm? Are you worried about the next generation moving into your farm? You know, all these ideas are important, but we want to kind of talk a little bit about more than just yield, but what other things are important as we're looking at the productivity of our farm. And so Evan Brame put this together and found this. It was talking about more than just return on investment. You know, there's a lot of expenses with farming these days. You know, our operating costs have really increased. Price of fertilizer last fall was skyrocketed. Rents are up. Machinery costs are very high. So, you know, I found this to be kind of funny. If I won the lottery, I'd farm for a couple of years and then try to win the lottery again. And you know, and that's about it. You know, you can spend a lot of money trying to farm these days, but more importantly, at Iowa Soybean Association, we think it's more than all those three. It's these three combined. It's productivity, profitability, and sustainability all at the same time. And so that's what we're focused on here at ISA. And I think as we talk today specifically about cover crops, I think that can help us to look at how can we maintain yields, be better stewards, and reduce cost while having those three goals all at the focus. And so that's the agenda. First presentation here. We'll go into some of the long-term cover crop trials. Matt will take care of that. Talk about some of the benefits and challenges of cover crops. And then I'll give a specific example from my brother's farm about how it was very profitable for us being a first year cover crop guy? And then how can ISA help you? And then that way you can have that action plan of, hey, this is something that really fits into my operation. And so how can we make these changes, and what do I need to do to adopt this action plan for adopting cover crops? And so with that, I'll turn it over to Matt and let him do some of the high yield.
We'll go over the long-term cover crop trials. And to give you a bit of history on this, this started with the Soil Health Partnership, which was funded through Iowa Corn and National Corn Growers Association back in 2014. The Soil Health Partnership was dissolved, I believe, in 2021, and in 2017, Iowa Soybean Association started adding trials to this as well. This was done in collaboration. You see some of the Iowa Corn National Corn Growers Association, as well as with Woodwell Climate Research and the NRCS. What's unique about this trial is that we have 24 unique sites across the state. We have 108 site years from 2016 to 2022. And as you can see from this map, we cover a lot of the state. This is an interesting data set. This is the first thing that I've really kind of got to dig my teeth into here as I started back in January of this year. And so just as a plug, I know we're going to talk about recruitment and studies for next year, but if you are currently participating in long-term cover crop trials, please continue to do so. This has been a great data set and resource for us and for others in this community and what we're working on. You can go to the next slide. So talking about those 108 site years, I know that we talked about how yield's not the only thing, but in this presentation, that's kind of what we're going to talk about. We have some data on soil metrics as well, but we're still digging into that. They're a little bit more complex to analyze. But what you see in this graph are those 108 site years. And what we see by and large, both in corn and soybeans, is that most of the time, there's not a significant yield difference between the cover crop trials and the non-cover crop strips. Of the 108 site years, 87 had no significant yield difference, 21 did. And I say 21 had yield differences because it's not a consistent pattern of whether there's a positive or negative yield gain. And so when we're thinking about management making decisions on whether to incorporate cover crops on our farms, know that there's some variability. And I think that Ryan later on is going to talk a little bit about the management and best practices for cover crops, but we'll kind of dig into what we're seeing. And hopefully it helps you make some more informed decisions about maybe possibly implementing cover crops on your farm. So when we look at yield by year, we have yield data from 2016 to 2022. When you look at the x-axis, it's the year. The y-axis is the bushels per acre yield difference, and that's the yield of the cover crop strip subtracted from the non-cover crop strip. What you see is that 2017 was not a great year for cover crops. That's where we had a pretty consistent yield loss, whereas across most of the other years, we don't really see much of a pattern. 6 of our 12 sites that did have yield loss happened in 2017. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, ISA started in 2017 with implementing cover crops across our sites as well in collaboration with the Soil Health Partnership. And so 2017 was a first year for cover crops for a lot of our fields. And when we go to the next slide, what we see, this is the same data set, but the difference here is that the x-axis is the number of years that a field has been in cover crops, or that site had been in cover crops. So we go from 1 to 8 years. And so that first year was the first year for a lot of crops in 2017. And so that 2017 has some confounding effects. What's interesting about this is that what we see, especially in soybean on the top of there in the purple, is that in your first year, you're probably going to lose about 4 bushels per acre on yield across the sites that we have. But after that, it pretty much levels out to a null difference, meaning that after your first year of implementing cover crops, soybeans, you shouldn't be expecting to see any yield loss. Corn is a little bit of a different story. You see the biggest yield drop in that first year, which kind of follows with a lot of the talks that we've had with farmers so far anecdotally. There is a lot more variability in this, and that's something that we're digging into, looking at, how much of the weather plays an effect. Something that we're interested in as well is kind of the species with, the grass following the grass. There may be something there as well. But if we go to the next slide, kind of give a quick summary of our findings is that, once again, across all years, we see 87 trials with no difference when we run them as a singular site. 21 trials had a yield difference. When we go to the results, when we break this down a little bit further, yield differences saw both a positive and negative yield gain. In soybeans, we see a yield loss. We only see 3 sites that had a yield loss, but 2 sites that had a yield gain. Corn, had 9 sites with a yield loss and 7 sites with a yield gain. And so when we're looking at this, it's not that if there is a yield difference, it's not consistently positive or negative. It's about split 50-50 of whether there's a yield loss, yield gain. And then when we run this analysis across all sites, so not just running single sites, as you all know, weather plays a huge effect, location, single sites are useful for your farm, but when we look at across the state, what we see is about a 1 bushel per acre yield difference in soybeans of cover crop. So on average, we see about a 63.4 with cover crops, 64.4 with no cover crops, and that difference is significant. What's interesting about this is that if you remove that first year, that yield difference goes away. And so when you're thinking about, managing, this is all the data that we have, but as you build your cover crop management practices, is just, get better at managing how you're implementing this, you really see no difference in yields. And then corn, we see about a 1/2 bushel an acre difference between the cover crop and non-cover crop. This is not statistically significant. As you saw in those graphs, corn does have a little bit more noise. I think there's a lot more interesting investigations that we can do to kind of determine, what management factors are playing into that, what weather variables are maybe affecting those yield differences and the variability that we're seeing. And then one thing just to keep in mind with this is that, we only talked about yield here today. Cover crops have a lot of benefits that we don't talk about. Erosion control is one. I think that's probably the biggest one. I don't think any farmer out there is going to say that they want their soil going off of their field. Anecdotally, we've heard some talks about possibly herbicide reduction, and Ryan's going to talk about this. And it's something that this upcoming year at our long-term cover crop sites, it's what we want to investigate and see. Is there any difference in weed species pressures at these sites that have had cover crops for 7-8 years at a time? If you have livestock, there's the immediate potential for grazing, which has a directly quantifiable value, and then carbon programs and other conservation type programs that can pay you for your management practices. So if you guys have questions about this after we're done presenting, be happy to answer them. Or if you have questions later on that you think of, please feel free to contact me, and I'd love to talk to people about this more.
So as we're talking about yield and, not having a big statistical significant difference on yield, I want to talk about why cover crops, because there is some risk involved with going cover crops, like Matt said. Sometimes you can have some bad years. And so with the right management, I wanted to touch base on, hey, how can cover crops be beneficial? And so one thing that Matt kind of touched on is weed suppression. And so I gave this presentation last week, and I asked them, hey, does anybody recognize this weed? And thanks, Tyler, for pointing out that, yes, that is a windmill in the background, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the water hemp on the left side of the picture here. And so this picture really shows right to the line, the left side did not have cover crops, the right side had cover crops. And you can see the visual difference of less water hemp in this field. And we had this own experience on our own farm this year, and I'll talk more about that later. But weed suppression is, it can be used as a tool that cover crops can use to reduce weeds. So that's just one reason to adopt cover crops. Last spring, we were very dry in Northwest Iowa, and we had a lot of erosion. Specifically in April, we had, I'll show a couple pictures here, but so I asked, did you see any of this yourself last year? And in the background, you can see by the growth site, there is definitely some erosion being done, some wind erosion from a hot, dry day, blowing some dirt around. But what I like about this picture is look closer in the front side. What do you see on the field right across the road there? It's starting to green up, and you don't see the wind erosion on that field. That's because there's cover crops. And so this is another picture I took last spring, and this was a field that was heavily tilled. It was chopped as well, so there was not a lot of residue left on that field. And they dug out this ditch a couple times last year. And so I put a quote on here of, necessity is the mother of all invention, and it's from Albert Einstein. But why wait for it to be a necessity when we're having all these goods removed? This is over $20,000 an acre ground up in Northwest Iowa, and we're having all that good topsoil blown off of this farm. Why not do something to prevent some of that and get a cover crop out there, especially on an acre like this that was chopped? You have the time, you have the resources. Hey, let's get something out there to help green up. And so, so there's a lot of benefits to adopting cover crops, and we're going to touch base on some of those. Erosion control is definitely one of the main drivers for it. But we found on our farm there's some other things that drove us to adopting cover crops. Grazing potential was a main one for us. We graze cows and corn stalks, and so I'll talk about that later. But there's a lot of different reasons why to adopt cover crops. Weed suppression is one of them as well. Water management, improved water quality. But I think I can show how cover crops can make you profitable, and with the right management and with ISA maybe helping you guide you along this process, adopting cover crops can be a profitable thing for your operation. So with that, I also want to mention that there's challenges to adopting cover crops. We realize that it takes a management change, it takes planning. There's things that you can have failures with cover crops if it's not managed correctly. And so the first thing I think of is herbicide carryover, not allowing establishment. So I do recommend always reading and following the label. Especially when you're starting to graze cover crops, there is labels restrictions on some of that. So always make sure you're consulting, thinking about what herbicides you're using as you're adopting cover crops. Establishment issues, we definitely saw that last fall. We were dry in Northwest Iowa, and I've been telling guys how dry it was. KICD is the radio station up in Spencer, Iowa, and they reported on October 22nd that they quadrupled the rain amount for the month. They went from 2 100s to 8 100s. Well, when you have that little amount of rain, yes, it's hard to get something established that is flown out and just sitting on top of the ground. We need moisture to establish it. So what that does is think, hey, what other options are available? I did notice some of the drilled stuff ended up coming and actually establishing versus maybe an aerial seeder or putting on with a drone or something like that. So, those didn't establish as well because they're weather dependent. So, it all depends on what fits into your operation, your system, and you can make those changes depending on the year and what fits into your operation. So, there's a disease bridge. If you're planting rye in front of corn, yes, there can be challenges that way. But I think there's ways that we can help overcome some of those. I'll talk a little bit more about termination and planter challenges as well. There can be insect pressure, but I think we can overcome a lot of these with the right management. And the next one I really want to highlight is nitrogen management. And so this is a little study that that was given to us, and it talks about the importance of having nitrogen available at planting if you're planting rye in front of corn. And so this is small plots. It was done over 3 years, as you can see, and there's 5 different nitrogen sources. There's ammonium sulfate and urea that's broadcasted. There's an early side dress at V2 with UAN. There's a starter put on the planter 2x2. There's spring anhydrous and there's fall anhydrous. And this was the results from that study. 210 bushel on all 3 of the ones that were basically applied at planting versus the anhydrous in the fall or in spring. And basically what I wanted to point out here is with the right management, putting nitrogen maybe in the right timing, we can overcome some of them barriers of rye in front of corn. And so that's just what I wanted to touch base quickly on. And it really gets back to, looking at the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship. Are we putting our nutrients at the right time, at the right source, the right place, the right time? And so, having that goal in mind really helps you come through, thinking about when should I be applying my nutrients? And the same thing is for manure. Can we get it a little more in season when it's readily available, being uptake by the crop? Yes, it's not the easy button. So that's the challenge that comes with it, is it might take a little more management. So does it fit in every operation? Well, I'm hoping so, but what fits in your operation, and you got to make that decision. But so I wanted to touch base on some of the termination challenges that I seen last year. So I did a cover crop tour in Cherokee County, and so some of these examples come from that. One thing I will point out that one pass of tillage didn't quite terminate rye cover crop last spring. In fact, I almost seen it green up more from one pass of a disc. Herbicide challenges with termination, you got to pick the right day. You got to look at the temperature, look at the forecast ahead and say, hey, is it going to be above freezing for a few nights in a row? Are we getting above 50 degrees? Are those weeds actively growing? Is that rye actively growing? That's when we need to be spraying. Using full rates makes rye terminate fairly easily if you pick the right day. The other suggestions I always had was, spray during bankers hours. During the middle part of the day, that's the best time to be applying glyphosate. So when it's cool, it doesn't work quite as well. If you can pick the ideal timing, that really helps to terminate your cover crops. And so having your own sprayer does make it that, hey, you can be there at that time that day. But, if you're just a one-man show, doesn't mean you have to shut down the planter to turn on the sprayer. I know a guy last year that did that because of how windy it was in Northwest Iowa. And you can plant early in the mornings and you can plant at night. You can't spray when it's windy, you can't spray at night. So sometimes it might take that management decision of saying, hey, I got to focus on this, get this terminated when is it ideal to shut down the planter? No, but that's just a thought that crossed your head. And then we also have the cost of herbicide has increased. We saw that with glyphosate last year. So that definitely adds to the challenges, makes you think of, hey, is there other ways of getting around termination that way? But still, for me, Roundup has been the most effective and easiest to do it. And so that's what we used on our farm. So with planter challenges, I definitely want to talk about consistency. So I went and helped a guy set his planter last spring, and it was his first time no-tilling corn into this rye cover crop. He sprayed it a day or two before he planted it. And when I got there, he had corn seed sitting on top of the ground. And I thought, man, this is going to be a disaster. But what we found is, hey, he had sunk his trash whippers down and he had locked them in place. And that was actually riding the whole row unit up. Once we got that figured out, we put that into float. We were having great seed depth placement, and it really planted real nice into the standing rye. So, just being diligent, taking your time to get the planter set right, doing those, doing some digs, making sure that the seed depth is correct. You got enough downforce pressure, you're getting it right where you want. Consistency is definitely what you need to strive for when you're planting into a rye cover crop. One of the other challenges I saw with him on the other half of the field, so he had rye, but he also had hog manure knifed in the fall before. And he decided to go at an angle and just pick an angle and plant across that. Unfortunately, that left him with inconsistency because he was going from a no-till rye into a tilled ground, and he had a lot of uneven emergence from his corn last year. And so it would have been maybe better to pick, try to stay parallel to the hog manure. He was a little worried that as dry as we were, that being right on top of that hog manure might have burnt some of his corn seed. So he wanted to stay off of it a little bit, not being directly on it. But that's just some things that I found talking with guys last year of, hey, if we can be as consistent as possible with that planter, that really helps when planting right into cover crops. And so with that, I want to move into a first-time success story from our own family. So I'm a conservation agronomist, but I also help on the family farm, and I farm a little bit on my own. And so this was our success story. We flew cover crops on September 12th of 2021. And so we were maybe a little bit behind. We were looking to graze this field. And so, if we would have been maybe a week or two sooner, we would have caught a few more rains and maybe got a little bit more fall growth than what we ended up with. But we threw 60 pounds of cereal rye out there. And so this is what it looked like. We did graze the cattle that fall. We were looking for a little potential that way from the grazing value of it. And this is the biomass that we got that fall. Not a ton, but enough that, hey, the cows were out there grazing on corn stalks and got some feed value from the rye. So then what we did is we planted green on May 10th last year. And, it was a little nervous for us being the first time planting green right into into standing rye. So it made us think a little bit. As I was riding in the tractor with Dad on my own farm, he looked at me and he said, my dad would have turned over in his grave if he saw us planting into this weedy mess. And I had that conversation with them. I said, things have changed over the last 60 years. Look at the planter technology that we have. Look at the herbicide differences that we have. So things have changed to where this makes it planting into this rye cover crop. And it's not a weed when it's there for a purpose. And so as long as we control it like that, hey, this is great, and we made it work. And so, so this is our farm. You can see where in the yellow is the shaded area where the rye was growing. We did till out the end rows, and we have the west half of the farm that didn't have any cover crop as well, and that was conventionally tilled. So it's kind of a comparison of the no-till rye compared to kind of Dad's way of doing it is the old conventional style. And so I wanted to show our yield map because I didn't see any differences. I had Matt help me and do a little bit of statistical analysis of it. And basically what I can say is there was no statistical difference on our yield being a first-time soybean. And so we found that a success for us. Visually, you couldn't see much difference in the no-till rye versus the conventionally tilled ground. And so yield being not a factor, there was a lot of other savings that we had. And one of them was our herbicide program. And that's where I want to show you a few pictures and kind of talk through what we did. So on our no-till rye side of things, we sprayed 32 ounces of Roundup and 6 ounces of Pro. And that was the day after planting. The other half of the field that we tilled, we put 6 ounces of Pro on. We came back with Liberty, Warrant, and Clethodim, and we had water hemp that didn't die. So we came back with Liberty a second time. We had an $85 bill for our herbicide on that half of the farm. On our no-till with the rye side of things, we had $40. Now there was a few escapes. I will say that. But the main thing that I want to highlight was there was one little patch of water hemp that I walked out. Outside of that, that 35 acres was clean of water hemp. Now, what did I see? I did see a few dandelions out there. I did see we did have some mare's tail, and I want to caveat that a little bit to our own. So my field that we did the same thing was an enlist field. This field was an extend flex. We didn't want to have to clean out the tank, so we just sprayed Roundup and Zidro Pro. Had we had maybe an enlist or extend, something like that, might have helped control some of that mare's tail a little better. But that's just what we found on our farm. Now, the other thing, the cows grazed out the volunteer corn. So we didn't even have much but for volunteer corn out there. So what I'll do is I'll show you a few pictures. So this is May 27th. On the left is the no-till side of things, and you can see that's the residue that we had out there. Now, it does take a good 12-inch residue to get weed suppression. You need some biomass out there in order to help with the weed control from growing rye. So, and that's what we did. We had about 12 inches of growth. We terminated it, and that helped us suppress weeds. So on the other half of the picture, this is June 24th after we sprayed. You can kind of see to the right there that, hey, there is some water hemp. It curled, it's turning brown, but it's not completely dead. And so then the next picture, I zoom in a little closer on our tilled ground. And yes, that water hemp isn't dead. This picture is more about on July 1st. We're evaluating it. We're deciding we're going to need to make another pass of Liberty trying to control that. Unfortunately, what we figured out, we went and sprayed on July 5th. And even though we were really dry last summer, we picked a day where it decided to rain that afternoon. And we still had issues with some of that not completely dying from the Liberty. Liberty works great, but they do have a rain fast on that, and we pushed that envelope a little bit. This, I want to show a little bit of our video. This is what we were looking at when it was time to spray, and I'll play through it here. So as we were making our decision of whether to spray or not, this is what we're looking at, and we did not see many weeds out there. So we waited and we kept looking. It's actually harder to not spray. The easy button is actually to go spray because, hey, then you're done with, maybe you have some residual out there, you catch a rain. For us, we did our scouting, we were diligent, we scouted it again. Man, there's not much out there. Why spend the money? Now, is this guaranteed to work every time? No. But what I think it is it is a tool that can be used, especially if you're struggling to control water hemp. And so I know other people have seen this same, like I said, we had the picture from that Scott gave us earlier that showed right to the line cover crops working versus not. Weed suppression is definitely a benefit from cover crops. So I wanted to touch base on the cover crop economic simulator, because we did throw our information in there just to try to figure out, hey, what was the value of cover crops to us? And so I do encourage people that are trying cover crops, pull up this tool on our research tab, go to results and tools, and you can click on the economic simulator, launch the simulator, and put your own information in. You know, what you can do, you can go through the cost to establish, the income opportunities, the cost mitigation, and then there's other things, added value for greater good. It can give you an erosion calculation that calculates the average ton per acre erosion for your farm. You can add values for that. And then it has a lot of resources as well for, it's got the Soil and Waters Outcomes Fund link in there, ISU, NRCS links, PFI. And then it also highlights a few other things from ISA, like our cover crop management book. But it's a really good tool. I do encourage people to use that when, as they're adopting, to think about, hey, what's going to be involved. And so with our farm, this is the dollars and cents that we showed the profitability of our cover crop field. We had $16.50 of seed cost and the $15 of airplane cost. But when we reduced our tillage to do no-till and cover crop. And so using Iowa State's custom rates, a pass of a disc and a pass of a field finisher is about $31.50 as well. So those kind of negated each other out. We were $45 less herbicide, and explained how that happened on our farm. We had income, we had the fall grazing, you know, that's really what pushed us to it. You know, we threw that as a $5 an acre gain for us. And then we had state cost share because it was our first time doing a cover crop. So with that, we showed $75 an acre profitability on our farm. Now, that's not including erosion control, better infiltration, you know, added value for greater goods, and other things that we are pursuing but haven't done anything yet is even carbon credits. And that's where I wanted to at least mention the Soil and Waters Outcomes Fund is a subsidiary of the Iowa Soybean Association. They do pay for practice-based changes. So once a change is, you have a change on your farm, it's verified, they have the verified outcomes, and they're selling those credits. So just some of the highlights of what makes Soil and Water Outcome Fund different from other carbon programs. You know, they pay for outcomes, not practices. They are able to stack outcomes and beneficiaries, and so they have maybe a higher payment. Have additionality, so you have to have a new practice, something changed to be able to make that carbon program work. But if you are interested, you know, Joe Winchell is a good contact there. Otherwise, reach out to them. Here's an email address and the website, theoutcomesfund.com. You know, they're a good resource if you're doing these practices changes. Hey, is it a reason to change your farm? No, but I think it's a nice added value. If you are making these changes, you should be looking at, hey, is a carbon credit worth something to my farm? And so that's just one other income opportunity that you have with adopting cover crops. This is a slide of cost share opportunities. And this is based up in Northwest Iowa, some of the cost share opportunities that are available for us. You know, reach out to one of us conservation agronomists and we can help you walk through what's available in each of your areas. But this just shows that there's a lot of different programs out there, and there's a lot of things that can help you to get to making cover crops profitable, and you know, and having a little bit of a payment to get you started in that first year or 2 or 3. Hey, that can really go a long way. That says, hey, this is working on my farm. And once you get established, you get through some of them little hiccups, you get these little incentives to do that. Then you're figuring out and you're going, hey, I want to do this on every acre, and it's worth it even without cost share. And that's so there is EQIP, there's CSP, WQI program. You know, state is definitely the easiest one. On the federal programs, you definitely have to be signed up ahead of time. So get into your NRCS office, talk to one of us conservation agronomists. We can kind of help walk through this. The other thing I will highlight is the Practical Farmers of Iowa had that nice $10 program last year, and that was able to stack on top of other cost share programs, and so that was a nice attribute. And then there's crop insurance discounts. Some of them, if you don't have any other cost share, you can get some crop insurance discounts. So like I said, lots of funding opportunities, but let us help you walk through those. So with that, I want to ask you, what is your plan for cover crops this year? When will you seed it? How will you seed it? What species will you use? How will you terminate it? Think into your operation of what works for you. And maybe some of you guys are already doing cover crops. And, so what are you going to change, or what practices can we think to make this even better? Some of the things I think of are, we've been looking at maybe frost seeding of clover and getting some nitrogen value out of it. I probably wouldn't suggest that to a guy who's never done cover crops before, but hey, where can we go to add more value to the cover crops that we're doing? Or if you haven't done cover crops, walk through this plan. When will you terminate it? What works in your system, in your operation for adopting cover crops? So, and with that, I want to ask, how can ISA help you implement these? So we have some resources available, and I'll walk through those, and we'll hear more about them in the next presentations as well. But here's just some things that I know about that we have going for us. Scott Nelson did a really good job putting some of this together. We have the Advances in Cover Crop Management. It's a very good, useful book of just looking at what are some of the challenges, some of the benefits, and then because you can see on the back cover, what is our best practice management for soybean, cover crops in front of soybeans, cover crops in front of corn. On year one, maybe it's doing a winter kill species in front of the corn. So you can at least get started with it, but not have the issues of planting right into it. Rye in front of soybeans, I think works really well. And like we showed earlier, hey, if we can do it while maintaining yields, we got all these other benefits, we can do this profitably. And so we do have the agronomist here on staff. We have the research agronomist in the 4 quadrants. Reach out to one of them for doing research trials with cover crops. We have the 5 of us conservation agronomists across the state. So if you got any questions on these things, reach out to us. Us as conservation agronomists, we're a technical resource for the ag retail outlets, but we're also able to work and come alongside farmers, work one-on-one to show, hey, where can this fit in your operation? What's available to you? And we can help, because of the research that we've been doing, we can help give sound agronomic advice to producers. And so, I will say, reach out to there's research opportunities, doing side-by-side trials on your own farm. This is some that we've done in the past, but we have, you'll hear more about what we got coming for this year. But, the best thing you can do is learn on your own farm. Hey, what works? And doing a side-by-side replicated trial really shows, hey, this is really working on my farm, and this is how I want to continue doing it. So some of the things that we also, as a conservation agronomist, we've been working on cover crop tours. This is I highlight my cover crop tour up in Northwest Iowa, Cherokee and O'Brien County. It's 19 different sites. It's a 52-mile stretch, and you get to see what people are doing on their farm to make cover crops work. And the best resource for making cover crops work is seeing how your neighbors are doing it. Hey, what's working for them? How can I use what's working for them and implement it on my own farm? And so I think that's really what these tours highlight, is how are other guys using cover crops and which system works best for my farm. So this one, there is 8 of them that are aerial applied, 10 of them that are drilled, and 1 was even applied with a drone. So I'm kind of excited to see how that looks this spring, comparing the different ways of how cover crops were applied. There's also different species and different termination timings. And there's a lot of different goals of why these guys are doing cover crops. A lot of these ones were grazed, or a few of them take it all the way to chopping that rye or taking it for haylage and then put another cash crop behind that. So I wanted to show this slide just because it shows, hey, this is what you see. You get the seeding dates, you get the rates, what species were they using, and you get their primary goals of why they were adopting cover crops. So it's kind of a busy slide, but it really shows that's what this cover crop tour is all about, is, hey, you get to see it, but you also get to see what they did to get to that point when you're taking these driving tours, and you can do it on your own farm. So a cover crop tour, we put the signs up, and whenever you're available, last spring we didn't get a lot of rain dates in April when cover crops were greening up. Maybe we'll get one of those this year up in Northwest Iowa. So, if you got some time, hey, you got things, we can take a quick drive and see what's greening up and how cover crops are working on other farmers. So these are the potential cover crop tours that we have across the state. We've gained more and more of them. We started with 1 2 years ago. We had 2 last year, and now we're looking to increase that this year. So we'll have more details come about it in the month ahead or so. Reach out to one of us CAs that we kind of highlight some of them, but that's just one other way you can kind of see how cover crops are working. We also did some knowledge plots last fall, and what these were 5 foot by 10 foot hand seeded plots. And the idea behind it for us was, rye is great, but can we find something different ahead of corn? And so we tried 20 different mixes. We hand seeded them. We thought, hey, this is going to be great. We're going to see a lot of good potential. We're going to learn a little bit more about winter camelina. We're going to see it in our, boots on the ground. We're going to be able to walk out there and see how it's working. But unfortunately, the weather threw us a curveball. And as dry as we were last fall, we didn't get a lot of growth. So we are looking to, kind of expand on these, learn a lot of information from them. And we are even going to expand them and do maybe some frost seeding this in the next couple of weeks ahead here, adding a couple other blocks to them so we can learn from that as well, seeing what works and what doesn't work. But as farming goes, we are dependent upon the weather on a few things, and so some of these didn't turn out real great last fall, but they're good knowledge plots that we were able to learn some from, and we'll continue to learn in the future as well. So here's where some of the cover crops knowledge plots are at across the state. We got a few more of them, but like I said, some of them, there's not a lot to see right now. So the other tool I wanted to, I touched base on it earlier, but the cover crop economic simulator is a great way for just looking at, hey, how is the value returned to me, and what other values, that maybe you didn't think of, should I be utilizing to look at my net return from cover crops. So with that, I just kind of wanted to do a review. Yield is great, but is it everything? If you're being productive, profitable, and sustainable all at once, how can we increase your farm that way? Fertilizer expense is expensive, and so as I talked with the 4 R's, hey, how can we make it so we're putting it on at the right time and getting the full value out of that? With the right management, I think cover crops have a little statistical effect on their yields, and we kind of showed that through our long-term cover crops. And then, then I showed our first-time success story, and then, of course, how can ISA help you through your cover crop journey? And so, so with that, put a game plan together. What is your idea for how can cover crops work on your farm? And if you're already doing it, what am I going to change this year to add more value to these cover crops? And that's really what we want to focus in on today. And so with that, I have these action steps. Have a goal in place, do some research ahead of time, ask around. The best thing to do is, talk to us. How does it work? What do I need to do to get it implemented? Ask your neighbors, find a neighbor that's doing cover crops and say, hey, well, why are you doing cover crops? And I think that's really what those cover crop tours highlight. Make your game plan, but be ready to change or adapt, because we know in farming, everything doesn't always go according to plan. So have a plan, have a backup plan, and then think about, the future of why you farm. And that's why I threw this picture up. This is a picture of my son climbing up on the tractor. And so it really highlights to me, for us, it's a long-term gain. And why were we switching to cover crops? Part of it goes back to what I learned in college, and that was at Dort, Genesis 1:28. They always talk to us, and God blessed us and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. So how can we subdue means care for, and for us, that's really what the driving force behind us is, why we adopted cover crops, is how are we caring for our ground and doing it to the best, being good stewards, being profitable, and being sustainable.
So a question for Ryan is, as in the spirit of Plan, Do, Check, Act, what did you learn? What did you and your family learn this year that you're going to alter, or what you're going to add to take the next step on this journey of adopting a cropping system change?
Yeah, it's a good question. We started with 35 acres, and then last fall we ended up going to 160 acres because it worked so well for us. So we started with a small chunk, then we gained more acres. We flew on last fall and that wasn't real successful. Now maybe we'll look a little bit more at going to, hey, maybe we're going to drill in, finding a little different solution, maybe something a little more consistent than flying on. A lot of it depends on what your goal is, and where we're trying to get grazing value, then we're trying to get growth that way. So, flying it on doesn't work every year, but that might be the best way of doing it for that farm. As we try different farms, trying to use the weed suppression, then maybe we'll look at drilling some after harvest, if we can find the time to get that done. And that's, so like I said, we're learning, we'll change things. Yes, Plan, Do, Check, Act. This is what we started with. We've gone to the next step of putting it on the whole quarter. And then we're advancing and going further and further as we, like I said, we do have some other options we're looking for as we go.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions coming in for you, Ryan. What is the cost range per acre of the various seeds that we can use for cover crops that will overwinter? So cereal rye is probably obviously the most common. Clover mixed in with cereal rye. What are some of the ranges that for the seed alone, not the application costs?
Anywhere from $15 to $50. You can, on the multi-species rate, you can get a lot of cost into there. And just on a straight, you can find it fairly cheaply. So just trying to figure out what works in your system, and figure out how much can you afford. Yes, there can be more cost when you start adding multi-species mixes, and so.
Great. And one last question here. Would strip tilling a rye established field ahead of corn be a plan to kind of minimize the competition with the residue?
So on our own farm, we actually bought a strip till rig last fall. So yes, that is, having a nice black strip in front of corn would be a great way of being socially distanced from that rye. We all know what that means now. So that is maybe a great way of looking at how to adopt rye in front of corn, is having a nice black strip to plant into. And so I think that's a great matchup of where two resources can combine, of no-till, strip till, and being able to utilize cover crops through that way. So.
Great. Yeah, and this coming year, we've got some experiments around what we're calling precision cover cropping. Targeting, making sure that the next cash crop is set up with success. So that'll be great. I'm going to take it over, and we're going to hand it off to Scott. Ryan and Matt, thank you very much for the great job and the great information. Next up is Scott Nelson. He'll be talking about advances in crop protection, and he's got a lot of information to share there.
Okay, well, thank you all for your time today. In the time that we have, we're going to talk about some new advances in weed management. We're going to talk a little bit about soybean gall midge and white mold. In the time that we have, we'll also hear from a farmer and how he manages weeds and disease and insect pests in his production. Just to start out, we hear a lot about, at least I hear a lot about, how modern crop production uses a lot of pesticides, and we're polluting the environment with our crop protection chemicals and such. And that's actually not exactly true. What I have here, this is for corn production, but this is the grams of pesticide used to produce a bushel of corn. And that's comparing in the gray from the 1950s to 2021. And when you look that over, you can see we've had over a 10-fold reduction in the amount of pesticide used to grow a bushel of corn. It would be similar for soybean as well as corn. We don't tell our story well enough about the successes we have in production ag for affecting the environment as well as feeding the world. And this is just a modern success story that we should all celebrate, is that the amount of pesticide we're dumping into the environment per bushel is a lot less than it's ever been. So say to yourself, you know, we still have stewardship issues, we're doing a good job. Okay, before I get too far, I noticed that there was some talk about cover crop termination, and I wanted to just do a few comments here. If you look in this picture on the far left, you can see we had taller cereal rye, and on the right we had shorter cereal rye. This was from a strip trial where we compared a pre-emergence herbicide applied with glyphosate to get at Ryan's previous question about what is the value of pre-emergence herbicides in cover crop production. And what you note on the left was the pre-emergence herbicide, it was a clay-based product, was applied with glyphosate. And what you can see is on the right, there was no pre, it was just glyphosate alone. And what happened was that the pre-emergence herbicide antagonized the glyphosate and allowed it to grow longer and larger on the left versus on the right. We had a lot of issues last year in terminating our cover crops, and some of that had to do with the cool, wet weather, but some of it has to do with glyphosate antagonism. And it's something that I want to mention to you today is some tips for cover crop termination. I know some farmers that feel like normally, most years, they have fantastic success with cereal rye in front of corn. I don't know why there's people have trouble, but this guy gets along really well. But this year, because it was cool and wet, the glyphosate died, or the cereal rye died later, and he had more competition. And this was the first year in his career where he felt like he lost bushels for corn, fallen cereal rye, just because the cover crop was slow and dying and it got too large. So a couple things you can do is spray when it's sunny. You want to get nighttime temperatures, spray when it's over 40 degrees. But what I want to really hone in is a lot of people will put liquid in with their glyphosate termination. And I just want to mention that to you. If we end up in a spring where it's going to be difficult to terminate anyway, you might pull that liquid in out of your glyphosate, so that you can get desiccation faster and the cereal rye doesn't continue to grow and compete with the soybeans or corn. So that's just a quick follow-up with some of the things Ryan was saying. I want to talk to you about some disruptive technology that's coming along. This is the topic is what's new in crop protection. And one of the most newest technologies that all farmers need to be aware of is precision guided spray technology. And this is camera-directed spraying, where the spray applicator during a post-emergence application, the camera turns on and off the herbicide when it sights a weed. Several manufacturers have this type of equipment. Deere is the first to the market. University studies have shown that it really works. I mean, those cameras can really find the weeds and turn on and off herbicides to dramatically reduce the amount of post-emergence herbicide use in corn and soybeans. There's significant crop protection company development going on in response to this technology. I'll talk a little bit more. This is a picture of the See and Spray Ultimate system from John Deere here on the right. And what I want you to notice is it has dual booms on it. So if you're in a situation where you're applying a post with a residual herbicide like you would in soybeans, you can still apply that post residual with one line, and then you can still save on your post-emergence pass with the other line and just do spot spraying with the See and Spray technology. There's another manufacturer that's called Green Eye, and they make similar technology. They have lights on their equipment. The other thing that they're working with on this technology is it gives you some high resolution scouting. So as the sprayer is going across the field, those cameras are detecting crop color and maybe they'll get to the point where they're detecting thermal imagery to detect disease and nitrogen status. And anyway, that's the hope. These systems do struggle in less than 30-inch rows. And like I say, some systems will allow dusk and nighttime applications, others will not. There's some pitfalls to this technology in that, well, here's a picture of your dual boom where you're spraying a residual as a post, and then your spot spraying with your post-emergence chemical. Some of the pitfalls is this is a complicated system and there's going to be some calibration involved for the user. Naturally, it comes with a significant investment with the new booms and that kind of thing. Some systems come with a subscription cost, and that may take some of the value out of it for the farmer. Like I say, it's been proven by universities, and it depends on how many weeds you have in your field, but in some studies, they've reduced weed post-emergence applications by over 90%, which you would think would be a great savings to the farmer, but you've also got application depreciation on equipment investment that you have to think about. And like I say, this is very disruptive technology, because if you imagine how is the crop protection industry going to respond when, say, 80 or 90% of their post-emergence market goes away? Are they going to want to invest in new post-emergence herbicides or not? That's an open question that we'll have to think about. So, but this is, I don't bet again. I've learned a long time ago, don't bet against technology. And while this is new this year, I expect in 5 or 10 years, this will be the norm where we are using precision spray guided technology. The other hope is that in terms of fungicide use, that we can spot areas of disease and reduce our fungicide applications. So just a heads up on what's coming to you in the future with precision guided spray technology. I want to switch gears now and just talk about pre-emergence performance of water hemp and soybeans. And this is a comparison of products from Iowa State University. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what are the best products for managing water hemp and soybeans. Pyroxasulfone Zidua. This is Iowa State research for 4 years, and you can see pyroxasulfone Zidua is probably the best there is for water hemp. Sulfentrazone, metribuzin, or Syncor products also work well. Tank mixes of these products do a very good job. What I want to point out is this acetochlor, and they mention this as acetochlor, but it's actually not a correct chart, because this is actually warrant, which is encapsulated acetochlor, which is not as effective as straight acetochlor. If you use a straight acetochlor, you'll get as consistent control as pyroxasulfone, but because warrant is encapsulated, you'll get a little weaker response to the residual control in the soybeans. And I mention that because a lot of farmers spend a lot of money on warrant, and in many cases it can do a good job, but remember that it is slow release. And if we don't get water to activate it, it's going to really struggle more so than many other post-emergence residual herbicides. Another issue that we're facing in Iowa is group 14 herbicides, and these are soil applied, Valor, and Authority. We need these herbicides to delay weed resistance, but we have issues, and I don't blame farmers. They want to get away from some of the crop response that you sometimes see with group 14 herbicides. You can see in the picture the bronzing of the leaves that we can have sometimes when we have rain and it splashes the herbicide up onto the leaves. We can get girdling at the soil level in some cases. This doesn't happen all the time, but group 14s can injure soybeans under cool, wet weather or with sensitive genetics. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time about how to reduce this type of injury, because group 14s are very, very important. We're running out of options in our water hemp war, and we need to keep these viable in our production. So the other comment is there are new herbicide modes of action being developed for the industry for soil applied water hemp control, but many of these are going to cause soybean crop response. And so we're going to have to, going on in the future, we're going to have to learn to accept some ugliness in our soybean fields if we're going to manage weeds well. So here are some tips for managing group 14 herbicide, and that's select tolerant varieties. This is a USDA study, and they're showing stand reduction for Valor and Authority on sensitive genetics and on tolerant genetics. And you can see on sensitive genetics, Valor and Authority reduce stand dramatically in these studies versus the tolerant genetics. There were large stand losses in these. Despite this crop injury, there were no yield losses in this study. But still, farmers don't want to tolerate large reductions in their stand counts. So selecting for tolerant varieties is very important. Some companies, not all of them, provide you group 14 tolerance ratings. And I would try to, if I were farming, I would tend to try to use those ratings when I'm using the group 14s. The other thing you can do is apply your soil apply group 14s ahead of planting. This is a study from 4 years published in Weed Science, where they compared soybean injury on the y-axis versus a pre-emergence application right after planting or pre-plant application 10 days or 14 days before planting. And note the dramatic reduction in soybean injury by applying the herbicide a week to 10 days before planting. So another thing you can do is apply your soil apply group 14s well ahead of planting if you want to avoid the injury. The other thing is to remember is that it is rare when soil apply group 14s do reduce yield. This is an average of work from Nebraska of 14 varieties and 4 locations of Authority applied pre-emergence. And the crop response to the group 14 did not affect yield at all. And you can see the yield here. This is one graph, but it's 15 varieties and 4 locations over 4 years. And you can see that there was really no yield response despite some early crop injury from the group 14s. So just to conclude, we have a revolution. We're not talking about it now, but of farmers reducing seed populations under early plantings. Be cautious with this, because if you're seeding below 100,000 plants per acre and you're using group 14's pre-emergence on sensitive genetics, you could lose stand. So be cautious with that. Remember, use tolerant genetics as much as you can. Apply a week or 2 ahead of planting. And in some cases, you may increase your seeding rate by 10% to account for potential stand loss. But with all that said, it's really, really important that we continue to use these group 14s, because if we use only auxin herbicides or Liberty to control our water hemp, we're going to develop resistance in the state, and we're really going to be sorry out of luck for options. So those are some comments about group 14 herbicides. If you have questions or you want to chat some more, just put them in the comments. There's still no easy button for water hemp, but there is. Bayer announced a new herbicide, diflufenican, or it'll be called Convitro. It is a group 12 herbicide that'll be available mid-decade for water hemp in soybeans. It's a different mode of action for herbicide-resistant weeds like water hemp, and this could be a very important tool for us coming in the future. So while it's not available now, I kind of wanted you to realize that there is a little bit of development coming in the crop protection industry, where we're beginning to see some new active ingredients slowly come to market for the management of herbicide-resistant weeds. I want to talk a little bit about, this is a study talking about the value of Liberty tank mixes in managing water hemp. And in this study, they applied different herbicide tank mixes to 2 to 4 inch weeds. And these were all glyphosate-resistant weeds with some group 14 herbicides that were used with them. What I want you to notice is that pre-emergence of Valor only was very low control, as you would expect. But a product of Enlist with Liberty worked very well. We had over 95% control of Enlist plus Liberty with a pre-emergence herbicide. Enlist post-emergence gave us a little bit less control. That did not have the Liberty in it. But and you can see the different products that we can use and throw against it. But we can probably the best tank mix that we can use for water hemp in Iowa is Enlist with Liberty, as well as if you're an Extend system or an Extend flex program, dicamba with Liberty. I want to talk a little bit about herbicide drift and auxin damage to soybeans. We have a publication that allows you to determine the differences between 2,4-D injury and Enlist injury on soybeans. Contact me if you want a copy of that publication and we'll get it to you. It's a lot of pictures. But what I want you to do here is I looked at the research and some herbicide labels, and I calculated how much spray solution in a sprayer, how much mixed solution will cause 5% yield loss in soybeans. And what I want you to see is this is the amount of spray solution in ounces per acre at the V2 stage, the R1 stage, and the R2 stage. And I'm comparing dicamba and 2,4-D. And what I want you to notice is that it takes a way huge amount more of 2,4-D to cause yield loss in soybeans. So compared to dicamba at the V2 stage and basically at all stages. Note that 2,4-D or Enlist programs are not like water. They can still injure Extend beans through drift, but it takes a lot more of the product to cause injury. So in an Extend system, it doesn't take very much dicamba to drift and to cause problems in your neighbor's soybeans. It's 10 times easier to injure neighboring crops with dicamba compared to 2,4-D is what I'm getting at here. So dicamba and 2,4-D can reduce non-tolerant soybean yields, and the risk of yield injury is greatest at flowering time in soybeans. And that's a good thing where they've managed the label for dicamba products. But we may still see problems with dicamba in soybeans due to corn resprays. And like I say, dicamba there was a lot of dicamba injury in soybeans last year, and much of that dicamba use was from corn that caused significant soybean injury. This is some comments and things that I had for you. And what I want to do is switch now and talk to a farmer. AJ Blair was the winner of our Production Research Award this year, and he's going to share some of his programs and his ideas for managing weeds. And then AJ, you just tell me when you want me to change slides.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Speak up a little bit.
Yeah. AJ Blair, I guess probably go to the next slide here. And so I'm going to preface this by saying I started farming in 2003, and my soybean herbicide program was a pass of 16 ounces of Roundup and then a second pass at 22. So that's where I came from. And that was the extent of my herbicide knowledge out of college. And then we've been raising non-GMO seed beans for Pioneer for quite a while. And it's really had to ramp up my learning on herbicides. So kind of an overview to start is just preseason. Where are you sitting at as far as target weeds, your tillage practices? Do you have cover crops? Do you have emerged weeds at planting time or ahead of season? So some things to think about once you get into season, especially for me with non-GMOs. I just consider the fact that I don't have effective post-emerge herbicides for water hemp. So we really focus on overlapping our residuals and antagonism as we're using some of the burner herbicides. I need to, if I was coming back with more effective post herbicide options, I wouldn't worry so much, but you know, antagonism between some of these products, I got to be careful that we're killing weeds correctly. Correct rates or full rates. We run into mixes that maybe have a partial rate of 2 herbicides and they advertise 2 or 3 modes of action, but what percentage of that is effective? And so kind of breaking down herbicides and mixes and making sure we've got effective rates. Adjuvants, making sure you're giving that product every chance it has. And then I think most farmers spend a lot of time looking at the weather, but really planning ahead and having a strategy to get those out there as best you can. You know, maybe starting a day sooner because there's some rain coming later, or adjusting rates because you got pushed back a few days by some rain. So, and then postseason, pretty valuable to spend time in the combine at taking notes and, you know, canopy, the canopy takes over after we're done spraying with our last pass. So I guess that's important, and fall spraying. So go ahead, Scott. So first thing I had to learn which herbicides kill which weeds beyond Roundup. And we say Roundup's not effective, but when you farm without it, there's a lot of good weeds it kills still. So first, we'll go out in the spring with first rate and 2,4-D, and mostly border fields where we've got known giant ragweed problems. That keeps it from coming in. Most of the time that giant ragweed comes in fence lines. So that's kind of a strategy that's helped is, go hit those fence lines. Giant ragweed emerges really early and it's kind of done after that. So if we can get some first rate out in the soil and then hopefully kill some giant ragweed early, that takes a lot of pressure and keeps it from spreading over a field. Seed beans it's a zero tolerance for black nightshade. And again, Roundup's great, but without Roundup, we're putting Pursuit in our post pass to take care of nightshade. So going back to some of these herbicides that we haven't used in a long time. And for water hemp, our main thing is soil applied. It's really hard to kill a water hemp plant once it comes out of the ground. So we still have some pretty effective options in the soil. So go ahead, Scott. So we try real hard to go with 3 modes of action in our burn down. We've been letting the rye grow longer, it took me a little while to figure that out without Roundup. Once the beans have emerged, we can't spray Roundup to kill the rye. So we've gone to clethodim. And so I go out early with 3 modes of soil applied activity and 2,4-D, but we leave glyphosate out on our burn down pass. And that lets the rye will yellow up, but within a few days in the spring, it comes back green, and we come back. So we do that ahead of the planter. And normally a week or so because of the 2,4-D. Then a week or 2 after we plant, we come back with clethodim and Outlook. So that layers some residual in there. Say we've got Authority, Zidua down early. Then we have Outlook a couple weeks later to layer in some residual, and the clethodim then kills the rye. So it seems like in the spring, you kind of have to get into mid-April to get that rye growth to really take off. So just a week or 2 extra really helps a lot to let the rye come up. And that's been a great help in weed control. And so like a product like Zidua takes a whole lot of water to be active. So we'll choose that one early, soil applied. And then Outlook is takes the least amount of water to be active. So we'll put that on a couple weeks later when maybe we're not going to get as much rain after that. So kind of thinking about how the herbicides work, the Zidua is going to gonna have the best chance of water because we're putting it on earlier and catching maybe some more of that rain. And then we come out and do our post pass last a couple weeks later. So I'm guessing that's on the next slide. So then we'll finish with FlexStar, and we know we've got resistance to FlexStar. So, you know, we've had some sampling done and we've proven it, but it's visible just from watching our fields. So we really we make sure our adjuvants are correct. Product like Cobra we've used in the past. That's kind of a tricky label just from the humidity and temperature. You change your adjuvant. So it's important to read the label and have stuff to be flexible to do the best job you can. Rye and narrow row spacing have helped us a lot. The canopy does a lot, and water hemp now is, I shouldn't say, I don't know if it ever was, but it emerges through the season. So if we have a canopy out there, that late emerging water hemp, it really helps a lot to have a good canopy for when we don't have effective post herbicides. So, and then with seed beans also, they have zero tolerance for corn in the sample. So we make sure to either raise our rate of clethodim post or make another pass. And so it's a lot of hours in the sprayer, but making sure we kill the weeds we're targeting. So anyway, I think, go ahead, Scott. So we had a field, these pictures, we had a field we tiled, and let's see. So some of it we had seeded rye in the fall, some of it we hadn't. And maybe the tile pictures are in there too. But anyway, this picture, you can see the right-hand picture here on the line. You can see the soybeans on the right side of the picture. And then on the left side of the picture, you can see how tall that water hemp got. And probably should not have been a field in the non-GMO rotation, but they needed the beans, so we put up with it. But you can see where we stopped drilling rye the fall before. So the fields have been, that's one field that was treated exactly the same, but we got some rye in, and then the other part of the field we tiled it that fall and spring and didn't have rye on it. So I mean, it's pretty amazing the difference that some spring or some rye growth had in that field. Probably next slide. We'll see what's there. Okay, here's a tile line. So this part of the field, we did have rye, and we put some tile in, and then we field cultivated over the tile lines to level them out. And the rest of the field was no-tilled, but every 70 feet, we had a field cultivator pass over the top of that tile line, which wiped out the rye, and it was disturbed. So, but anyway, you can see the no-till, and you can see where I left a pass of rye to grow with the sprayer in the background there. But the water hemp is over that 15 or 20 feet from the field cultivator, and the rest of the field, I mean, it's just pretty amazing the amount of help that showed up later in the year. So next. So when I get to late season, we do a lot of scouting from the combine and take notes. A lot of winter annuals, the beans are brown and you're combining, and our thistle patches and mare's tail and stuff show up pretty good in the fall. So we target fall spraying. I usually try to get a couple loads of 2,4-D, maybe some Valor out in the fall, and 2,4-D dicamba, I should say. But that's a lot nicer time of year than to worry about spraying dicamba because nobody's out there. I don't have anything to worry about killing. And I feel like if I can rotate a few fields of no-till corn stalks and just rotate that around, then that helps keep those winter annuals down on our non-GMO fields, keeps that in rotation. We make sure we have cover crops anywhere we've got non-GMO seed beans going. commercial beans or say Enlist or Liberty, we don't worry so much, but we still do a lot of cover crops that way. But we make sure that we have rye and we're fall spraying some of those fields to keep our weed pressure down. And that's, yeah, we've also moved some fields out of a non-GMO rotation to get the weeds under control and move them back. So crop rotation and moving to even a longer crop rotation. We started some oats, but just to throw weeds off. Next slide. So we've had a lot of issues. The first year we did the clethodim to kill rye on non-GMO beans. I was used to maybe 6 ounces for volunteer corn, and well, we'll spray 10 ounces and that'll take care of it. And a week of not even rain, just misty weather where we couldn't spray, put me back a week later than I wanted. And I didn't make sense, or I didn't think through it. So I sprayed my 10 ounces and we had a lot of just yellow rye that was bigger than I anticipated, and I didn't adjust my rate up to 16 ounces. And so we had a lot of rye just hanging on, and our second pass for volunteer corn killed it. But that was kind of a scary issue, watching all this tall rye sit out there, and is it going to die or not? Enlist soybeans, we had to walk a field. The first year we had Enlist soybeans got put in late in the spring. We got a call, do you guys have a place for these beans? And they were seed beans, and we didn't get the volunteer corn killed the first year. No, we didn't know about that, and nobody told us. So we used the wrong corn killer, and then we got to pay some bean walkers to go out and walk for volunteer corn to make seed quality there. So I've lost some fields, lost seed premium on some fields because of hail, opened up that canopy late. And then smooth ground cherry, we had some smooth ground cherry problems come through because that canopy was open, and it was enough. It wasn't really worth walking the field. So we, forfeited our seed premium. We couldn't combine that for seed. So poorly drained fields, it's amazing what tile does for yield, but also weed control. If the crop's not growing, you're also not canopying, and your herbicides aren't going to work as well in those areas. You're not timely. Cover crops and no-till let us get more days in the field. We can drive across that field. If you think about your walking across your yard versus walking across the plowed up garden in the spring. So every day, when you're dealing with the weather and wind and rain, one more day in the field or one day earlier is a huge difference when you've got water hemp growing a week or an inch a day type thing. So that type of stuff really helps coming into weed control issues, I guess. And then we've had all kinds of issues establishing cover crops. So we've gone to drilling mostly, but you've got to have dry weather to run the drill. The years we've hired an airplane, then it won't rain. We've hired a Hagee before on the years it did rain and wouldn't stop, so they couldn't drive through the field. So I feel like we should throw some cover crops out all different ways every year, and at least we'll have some acres right. But just keep working at it and know that none of those options are perfect, and so have some backup plans. Next slide. Spiking. So some of the wins I've had is spiking the premix products. You look at a mix and figure out the rates of each ingredient, and maybe you need to buy the ingredient separate. Authority products, we used to buy Spartan by itself, which is a lot more expensive than the Authority mixes, but we dump in Authority whatever, they've got a whole bunch of different blends, but then also add a couple ounces an acre of Spartan on top of that to bring the Authority rate higher, because those pre-emerge herbicides are the most effective. So if you think about it, your rate of pre-emerge herbicide is mostly giving you the time. So the higher the rate, the longer that herbicide residual is going to stay there. So for me anyway, we want as much time as we can. That gives us a little flexibility with weather later in the season if we can't get there in time. So water tanks at home and sprayer capacity, it's expensive, but adding a little capacity, wider boom, spray speeds, being able to get timely in one more field that day leaves you from having a field that got sprayed a week late, which can be huge in the summertime. Moving some acres to small grains, hay, corn on corn, effective herbicides. So rotating problem fields somewhere else for a little while, just using that rotation to help control weeds. Planning, that goes back to water tanks and also early in the morning, making sure you've got your day mapped out so you've got product and you're not making moves and wasting time during the day when you may only have a 3-day window to get as much spraying done as you can. Cover crops have been good. I talk about getting established and it's a struggle, but rye especially seems to come up in the spring no matter what we do. And so having it there has been a big help in weed control. Scouting and soil structure and flotation tires and tile, that kind of comes back to the cover crops. But tires are expensive, but again, it's that one more day without doing damage, tiling fields. That all comes back to beating the weather. And the last 2 years, I think it's been pretty easy aside from wind, but now we're getting some spring rains again where it can be a real struggle to get everything done in the day you have. So just weatherproofing things as much as you can to be timely, because the weeds are growing. If it's raining and warm, you can't spray, but the weeds are growing. So, all right. Is there another one?
Well, we got you here just real quick. You were part of a study with this weed terminator. The weed seed terminator is a new product that will destroy. It does a very good job destroying weed seeds at the end of the season. What was your impressions of it on your farm?
We'll see here this spring or this year. This will be they ran it this fall at harvest time and harvested some of my beans in a trial. So we'll watch that area this summer and know, it's hard to know until we get into watch a growing season for a year or two, but it's a 3-year trial in the same area. So hopefully we see some reduced weed pressure in the areas where they're using the seed destroyer. But we're coming into the first growing season, so we'll see what the weed pressure looks like. But
we'll watch the ISU research. They're going to do economics on that as well, so we can figure out if it's worth the investment. So
I did on a field, we baled soybean stubble one year. I windrowed out the back of the combine, and I don't normally do that, but I did one year, and we had strips of weed pressure there for a couple of years. And it kind of goes back to this same thing, even in the strips, maybe that's better than having it on the whole field. I don't know, but the combine moves a lot of weeds around. So
yeah. We're getting short on time, and I need to cover one more important issue for you all, and that is gall midge. So most of you know, if you've talked to Iowa State, gall midge is in 8 new counties in 2022, and it's spreading east. And as you know, gall midge is a fly that lays its eggs in the stems of soybeans. It gets in cracks and does horrible damage to the crop. In 2022, the severity was lower in 2022, but there were more. The severity was less, but the expansion of the pest was greater in 2022. Checkoff dollars have enabled screening for host plant resistance. They have some leads identified, but they're going to take a while for us to work that germplasm and finally identify resistance to this very destructive pest. Seed treatment and foliar insecticides are not effective. And if you don't know, gall midge can reduce yields 60–70% along the field edges of crops of soybeans. So it's a very destructive pest that we need to watch. It began in Nebraska and it's moved east. And it continues to move east. So what do we do about it in the meantime? Now, we agree with Iowa State on most of their practices, most of their recommendations, but we disagree in that our data with Thimet shows some advantage. And Thimet is a closed box insecticide that you can apply to control soybean gall midge. The way the system would work is you wouldn't treat the whole acre because soybean gall midge starts at the field edges in the grassways and moves into the soybeans every year. So we believe in what farmers have experienced is that they can ring the field with Thimet, that they can protect the interior of the field and maybe not eliminate the pest, but they can increase whole field yields through this system. So what you would do is, nobody has insecticide boxes on their soybean planter, but corn planters equipped with smart box systems, you could plant your soybeans with your corn planter, ring the field, and then plant the rest of the field with your soybean planter. This is University of Nebraska research, and there was an 18 bushel yield advantage from their results in 2022. Untreated was 28 bushels, Thimet in furrow was 42. And you can see in furrow versus banding, in furrow seems to work better. They also, University of Nebraska also found that hilling or throwing up soil around the base of the soybeans protected the crop. But I don't know how practical that is for Iowa farmers, especially on steep slopes. So Thimet has been shown to be a good practical practice, and farmers in Nebraska use it, have testified that it helps them. Here's some more research from the University of Nebraska. This was published, this is from 2021, and you can see that there's substantial, under heavy pressure, there's substantial yield advantages under soybean gall midge. Thimet does not make the gall midge go away, but it does slow them down and reduces the populations. In our research with RCFI, this is an example where we had more healthy plants 150 feet from the Thimet. We measured untreated and Thimet treated. And this is like 150 feet away from the treatment that you can see we had more healthy plants. This translated into a yield increase, but you can see I divided up the replicates each, but you can see in general, there was about a 6 bushel or 4 bushel yield advantage for Thimet in our results in 2020. Here's an example of Thimet along a field edge. This is we did a checkerboard of Thimet and no Thimet. This is no Thimet, and this is Thimet treated along the field edge there. You can see we had a lot more plants and a lot more health. Thimet is not the solution for soybean gall midge, but it is a band-aid for you. If you are in a situation where you consistently have soybean gall midge, then you need to think about ringing your fields with Thimet. The pitfalls of the system is it's very dangerous. It requires a closed system, a smart box, or a SIMPAS system. Its cost is around $50 an acre, but remember, you're only treating the inrows or waterways. And in Scott's opinion, if gall midge is persistent, ring the field with your corn planter. And my time is up. Do we want to answer questions, or do we want to continue on, moderator?
Okay, Ben, I'm gonna kick it to you, and I see you got it up on the screen, and I'll stop my video and I'll put myself on mute.
Welcome, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed all the information you've heard so far. A lot of good stuff. A lot of good research going on. Like Roger said, there's never been a better opportunity to get involved in the conservation field than there is right now. So the title of this presentation is Research and Conservation Opportunities for 2023 and Beyond. Earlier, when this was scheduled to be in person, you were going to hear from a variety of team members that are listed here. But due to time and moving online here, You're going to hear from myself. I'm Ben Porup, conservation agronomist out of the Ankeny office here with ISA. And later on, we're going to hear from Alex Schaefer, a regional agronomist with RCFI. So with that, we're going to jump into it. All right, so starting off, we wanted to ask you to keep a couple questions in mind throughout the presentation. First one is, what opportunities exist on my farm? What opportunities do you have on your farm? Whether it's conservation, improving yield, a research opportunity maybe. Just be thinking, you know, what is the potential of my farm and what opportunities exist? We also want to consider, what can I learn from my farm? Everybody has something they can learn from their farm. Again, this is kind of a question that often gets overlooked and maybe even is hard to answer for some. But what can you learn from your farm? Maybe it's from the opportunity that you want to enroll in. And then what's your game plan? We've heard all morning that this webinar and these sessions are focused on building a game plan. What's the game plan for your farm? How are you going to take that next step towards whatever goal you have within your operation? What to expect out of this webinar? This webinar is going to focus again on having a game plan for your farm. So in this session, we're going to explore some of the resources and opportunities available here at RCFI to help you build your game plan. We're going to review just some basic tips on how to construct a game plan, and then we're actually going to build a game plan. So if you guys would like to pull out a piece of paper, or if you have the action plan virtually downloaded from the webinar, we'll circle back to that here towards the end of the presentation. But we are actually going to build your conservation or research game plan, just a basic form. And there will be an opportunity to submit those, and you'll be entered in to a drawing for a couple of gift cards. And we'll circle that back again when we start building those game plans. But we're going to start today talking about some of the opportunities we have here at RCFI. And this is one of my personal favorite areas the conservation team deals with here at RCFI, and that's oxbow restorations. So what is an oxbow? An oxbow is an old meander of a stream that's been cut off from its main channel. Oxbows naturally become disconnected when the outside bend of the stream bed erodes, resulting in oxbows becoming off-channel wetlands. So this is how we naturally think about these oxbows forming. As you can see here in this first picture from 1930, I believe, or 1944, there it is. We can see that nice natural flow that the stream has. And as we progress through the years, kind of that first little turn around this bottom edge, you can see the side of that stream starting to erode and almost, not quite, but almost forming that straight connection through. And as we go through the time here, you see more sediment starts to fill the oxbow. The stream edge there has finally eroded, and it's starting to take a new path of flow. And then here by 2006, we can see that oxbow, that old little horseshoe, has completely disconnected, filled with sediment, and is no longer receiving stream flow from its initial source. We can also have man-made oxbows that don't occur naturally, whether it's coming in and intentionally failing to expand cropland, whatever the reason is. These can also be formed man-made. So when we restore these, go back a slide. When we restore these, what does it mean to restore an oxbow? We go in and we dig out the sediment down to the old stream bed. So there's a rock layer under where all that sediment's filled in. And when the stream beds reach, we actually start to see water bubble up through the rocks, which then starts to fill the oxbow in. And when we take the sediment out, it reconnects to that channel and provides numerous benefits, which we'll come up to here in the next slide. But the great thing about oxbow restorations is there's statewide funding. You know, you're probably sitting here saying, Ben, this sounds like an expensive process. How can we cover those costs to bring in the equipment, the people, and have all that time to dig them out? The great thing about oxbows is there's statewide funding available. There's also location-based funding opportunities. such as NRCS's RCPP programs. RCPP stands for Regional Conservation Partnership Project. We'll explore that a little bit here later. But there's also state and private dollars that can be utilized to come in and restore these oxbows and offset the costs. In the RCPP, specifically here at Iowa Soybean, we lead a project called the North Raccoon Soil and Water Outcomes RCPP. Between that and matching it up with private funding, we can cover 100% of an oxbow restoration. So a pretty unique opportunity that we have here at RCFI to come in and dig these out and restore them and kind of go back to where they started from. We have a person on staff here. His name is Brandon Iddings. He's kind of in charge of all these oxbows and some pollinator stuff we'll have coming up. His contact information will be shared at the end of this presentation. And then, as Roger mentioned earlier, a list of all of RCFI's staff and their contact information will be emailed out to you with the recording in this presentation. So looking at the benefits of when we come in and restore these oxbows, they're restored for a variety of reasons, including that we normally put them in unproductive areas along a floodplain that's usually not in row crop. So we can take this area of ground that's not in production, isn't, profitable in a sense in the operation, and we can restore this wildlife and natural flow of a stream back. The landowner can also take the soil that's removed from these oxbows and the sediment and put it back into the crop fields. The soil that's removed is typically really good, rich black soil. So we've seen some benefits where the farmers that are going in and restoring these oxbows can spread it across the field. We've seen some yield bumps in areas, and there's a possibility there for research in the future. That's an explored benefit. There's also several water quality and habitat benefits, as I mentioned. We'll talk a little bit about pollinator plantings and planting them on the side on the beds of these oxbows here in a couple slides. But there's a lot of water quality benefits to these oxbows as well. As you can see here, this picture just kind of shows that this oxbow on the bottom where it used to flow is still in an unproductive area. It's not being row cropped in 2018. So this would be a good example of where we could come in, restore this oxbow. It wouldn't be cutting into the producer's row crop ground and really maximizing the unproductive area there on the farm. Here we have some cattle down drinking in the water, and they love it. We get a lot of questions, my cow's going to get stuck. We do not see that in these oxbows. They love it, and it's just provides a really good opportunity for them to get in and have a clean drinking source. And then this is a picture of some water sampling that we have coming up. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but just quantifying the water quality benefits that these oxbows have is a key part of what we do here at RCFI. So I mentioned a little bit pollinator planting. This is another awesome opportunity we have here at RCFI. Again, we try to plant these in unproductive areas. They tend to be around grain bins, ponds, buffers along streams, or fields that are difficult to access or plant row crop in, like we saw in that last picture. We try and make these plantings as easy for the farmer as possible. So we'll hire the contractor to prep the site, which usually is mowing and spraying. And then we go in and plant the site either by frost seeding or by drilling it in. We kind of look at that on a case-by-case basis and what we're trying to accomplish. And we can also help establish prairie strips with this, or with some of these big 4-inch rain events we've had the last couple of years. We can help plant around field intakes to help slow erosion and treat some of that water. So a lot of great benefits with these pollinator plantings. And it's something we're kind of fairly new into here. And again, Brandon Iddings, a staff member that takes care of the oxbows, is kind of leading that pollinator charge. So reach out to him if there's any interest there. Some of the benefits, again, very similar to oxbows. We try and focus planting in unproductive areas, with input costs being where they are. Some areas have more benefits when planted into pollinator. If they aren't really bringing anything to the ROI conversation aren't really profitable in row crop, we can look to plant them into pollinator habitat. And as mentioned, the pollinator also provides water quality benefits, such as the plants that are in the mix, taking up nitrogen found in the water, especially around those tile inlets. Again, we see that affect the most. Perhaps the most observable benefit, though, of these pollinator plantings is wildlife habitat. A lot of different species use areas like this. Several different species of birds, deer, butterflies, bees, you name it. Pollinator planting serves as a great natural source of habitat, especially when we stack these practices, so we're getting the most benefit out of areas we aren't farming. If we plant a buffer strip, maybe we could intercept a tile line and turn it into a saturated buffer with pollinator planting on it. Or if we restore an oxbow, we can plant pollinator along the banks and edges, kind of just stacking those practices, getting the net conservation benefits. Is a real opportunity with these pollinator plantings. So as mentioned, both pollinator plantings and oxbows, as well as some of the opportunities we're going to discuss here in a minute, are focused on water quality. Here at RCFI, we do offer water monitoring across the state based out of our certified water lab here at the Ankeny office. We can monitor specific tiles from your fields to determine your nutrient loss, and also monitor any edge of field practices that you either already have installed or are interested in installing on your farm to see how the water quality has improved from before we implemented the practice to after. We're always looking for water monitoring people in groups. So in these groups, we can look to see how you compare to neighboring areas, see where we're losing the most nutrients out of the field, and look to see who's making big strides at keeping nutrients in the field. Again, with input costs where they're at. All the nutrients you apply to your field are very important for your crops, and we want to minimize how much is lost as much as we can. So water monitoring is a good way to look at, where am I at, maybe without conservation practices, or where I'm at with the ones I've already implemented, and how we can take that next step at keeping your nutrients and your dollars in the field. For more information on water monitoring, certainly reach out to myself, Alex, anyone here at RCFI can get you directed. The person that leads our water monitoring programs name's Tony Seaman. You'll see his contact information again at the end. But certainly feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'll get you going in this awesome program. So now that we've talked about some in-field opportunities, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite part. Organizational and programmatic acronyms. Let's see how many participant numbers drop off when I say that. So you've probably heard numerous acronyms, numerous organizations. The conservation world, especially in terms of cost share and all the different program names out there, can get confusing. And a lot of times you're probably sitting there thinking, I don't know what half those words mean. At this point, I'm too afraid to ask. It's okay. There's never been more opportunity out there than there is right now. So there's new names and new acronyms and new terms popping up every day. And we're just going to review a couple of those here on this next slide to kind of get you a little more comfortable with them and some of the terms you'll hear. Now, I will throw out a disclaimer. Not at the end of this slide, the end of the next slide, we're going to have a test. Okay, you're going to have to know these organizations, the cost share, and on the next slide, we'll preview some of the cost share rates just that are pretty familiar or pretty common in the area. So we want you to be familiar with them. We want to test how much information you can retain out of these next two slides, because it'll be beneficial going forward. So looking at organizations that you commonly hear in the conservation realm, there's USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, IDALS, which is the Iowa Department of Land and Ag Stewardship, and ACWA, we work closely with here at ISA. That's Agriculture's Clean Water Alliance. So these are all organizations that you'll hear around farming as a whole, but are specifically, starting to really get into the conservation field, offer these different programs, and are going to be resources moving forward and provide some of these cost share programs you see listed on the bottom. So as I mentioned earlier, RCPP is the Regional Conservation Partnership Project, WQI, Water Quality Initiative, CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program, CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CREP, which stands for Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. So this is just a small selection of the opportunities that are out there, but some of the more common ones you'll hear, maybe you've already been enrolled in some of these programs, or maybe you're looking to get into some of these programs. Certainly feel free to reach out. But moving on to the next slide, what do those cost share programs actually mean? What kind of funding's out there? You know, we sit here and we say there's never been more opportunity, never been more funding. We'll actually quantify that. So when we look at cost share programs that the conservation agronomist team here at Iowa Soybean works with, we see values from $25 to $92 an acre for cover crops. Now, those payment rates are going to vary a little bit based on seed type. You know, are you new cover crop adopter? Are you adding, going from single to multi-species, stuff like that. But there is opportunity to get up to $92 an acre. Usually for first time adopters, with some of the programs, we're going to average that $60 to $65. If you've never been in cost share for cover crops before, there's great opportunity in that $60 to $65 range. And same with the no-till strip till. We've seen values from $10 to $25 an acre. That's going to vary basically if you're strip tilling or no-tilling. That's the only difference there. Saturated buffers, bioreactors, and oxbows. Some of the edge of field stuff's a little harder to predict exact numbers because it varies based on size, soil cover, liners, that stuff. But usually edge of field, saturated buffers, bioreactors, up to 100% covered. And then as we mentioned in the oxbow section, Iowa Soybean utilizes different funding pools. We have private dollars to 100% cover oxbow restorations. And a lot of these cost share programs, you'll see contracts that range from 1 to 3 to 5 to 10 to 15 plus years. So this is all pretty basic, straight and forward information. As I mentioned, we're going to have a test. So get ready. It's on the next slide. And I do expect you to know most of this information. So I guess here we go. Actually, just kidding. Here at RCFI, we have an awesome team of conservation agronomists. As Roger mentioned, most of these conservation agronomists are housed in ag retailers across the state, leveraging the relationships that those retailers have with customers to help implement conservation. But we're all available to work with anybody that's interested. And kind of the main roles that we have, you know, provide technical assistance to farmers, retail agronomists, and industry professionals. The last thing we want to do is have someone go out, implement a conservation practice, either not have the confidence or not understand the best management practices or how it fits into their operations, and then they never want to do it again. The cool thing about this network is, yes, we evaluate cost share programs. Yes, we tie in research to it, but we're going to be there from the time you call us and have the initial conversation the whole way through your implementation process, because we want to make sure that you are successful. So that's how providing sound agronomic advice to producers kind of falls into that category. And then, as we mentioned, we have connection to cost share and local implementation resources, such as, you know, seed dealers, contractors, you name it. We have the local resources. So there's never been more opportunity to get into the conservation field. It's an exciting time to be going into the conservation field, to expand on your current conservation efforts. We don't expect you to be an expert on all the programs and all the opportunities and all the practices. That's what we are here for. So please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'll reach out to you guys as well with any questions you have, not only about conservation, but about anything here at our CFI. We'll get you connected with the right resources. So some other cool things that you've already heard about in an earlier presentation that the conservation agronomists do, that's not just cost share, as we have our 2023 cover crop tours across the state. As you can see here on the left, that's a picture of cover crop for last year's tour up in the Cherokee area. So we had some really good growth there. And it's just one of the varieties of application methods, goals we're looking for when we set these tours up. Here's kind of what it looks like. They're usually between 15 and 20 sites long, scattered across a decent size area, usually about 20, 30 miles when we're all said and done. But things we evaluate are, what species have been planted, what seeding method was it, aerial applied, broadcast, tilled, what was the previous crop, what are our seeding rates, seeding dates, what's our goals. A big part of having a conservation game plan, it's actually the number one step, what you'll see later, is identifying a conservation goal. So as you can see here, we have some that are used for just education, some grazing, soil health. These tours really do a good job of encompassing the variety that's out there. There's not one way to do conservation. There's a million plus ways. So just kind of being able to see and compare in your local area what works for in some scenarios, what doesn't, what factors might influence is really cool. So if you're interested in participating in one of these cover crop tours, we'll have more information on this spring's tours coming out here in March. And if you have a site that you think would be good for upcoming cover crop tours, reach out to us and we'd be happy to put you on the list. Another cool thing the conservation agronomists do, which is an opportunity for you guys as well, is our cover crop knowledge plots. So the goals of these plots are to learn species suitability across the state. We compare seeding data points, so crop maturity, calendar data when we did it, how much moisture the locations had, and we're going to incorporate some frost seeding coming up here in the next month or two. But these knowledge plots really allow us to go out, evaluate, there's this idea that certain crops will grow in certain parts of the state better than others. It won't grow in certain parts of the state. On these knowledge plots, we take 5x10 boxes and we go out and we hand seed these plots with different species mix, which you'll see on the next page, just to evaluate, let's look into these myths that maybe it won't grow or confirm that it will grow here. And then we'll look at biomass accumulation. So how well did it grow? Is this a potential option in this area in the future? Can we put this into a strip trial? Are we going to try a whole field? So these knowledge plots scattered throughout the state. These are just some of the mixes that we've included with this last year's plots. Do a lot of focus on rye and radish, rye and turnip, kind of your clover mixes. Winter camelina is a big one that's come up over the last couple of years. I've seen a lot of growth out of my plots with winter camelina, and it's certainly a species that we're going to continue to do research on and look to kind of be a big one coming up here. And then we do some mixes with rapeseed. So as you can see on the map, we have a lot of different plots out there, a lot of different regions. We would like to have more. So again, if you're interested in seeing what species work on your farm, reach out and we'd love to get you a plot. So we've talked all morning about building a game plan for your farm, whether it's research game plan, conservation game plan. They're crucial for taking your farming operation to the next level. So this is the part of this presentation where we're actually going to build your conservation game plan. We're going to review the steps and what, if you call a conservation agronomist, kind of how we put our game plan together for your operation. And then we're going to review an example that's already been put together and just kind of see how it formally works. So this is going to be where the gift card drawing is going to come into place. So if you want to take out a piece of paper, or if you have the action plan downloaded from the website, I'll give you a couple seconds here to pull that out and a pen or pencil. And once you complete this game plan, I'll have a slide later. You can either email it to myself or snap a picture on your phone and text it to me. And you'll be entered in to win a gift card. So we'll have a couple gift cards to give away, and that drawing will happen. And the winners will be announced when the follow-up email to this with the recording is sent to you guys. So when we look at building a conservation game plan, as a conservation agronomist, where I always start is identifying a conservation goal. So what is our goal? Is it prevent soil erosion? Is it reduce nutrients lost? Is it weed pressure that we're trying to deal with? As we saw earlier, those were great pictures. Identify your conservation goal. So whatever you're trying to accomplish, if you're not comfortable with your own, maybe it's something your neighbor you think they need to accomplish. But step number one is identify conservation goal, your why for wanting to implement one practice. So after you've identified your conservation goal, step number two, reach out to a conservation agronomist. So again, as I mentioned, we're here to help you. It's not just a phone call. Hey, I'm interested in this. What do you think? Okay, I'll never talk to you again. We're going to be there from the moment you call all the way through implementation. So identify your local CA. I'll have a map of those up at the end. Again, if you don't know what CA is in your area, feel free to reach out to me, anybody here at RCFI, and we'll get you hooked up. And number three, we're going to determine a solution. So maybe, as you'll see in this next example, maybe your goal is to reduce soil erosion. So how are we going to do that? Are we going to do no-till, strip-till, cover crops? You know, what's our game plan here? So determine the solution that you want to explore, the practice you want to implement. Step four is develop a site-specific implementation plan. This will be hard to do in this while you're filling it out on your own. But you'll meet with the CA and we'll look at the site. You know, the CA will have insight. Is this practice more likely to work here? Is there another route we need to take? But we'll sit down and develop site-specific implementation plans. So, you know, when am I going to plant these cover crop? When am I going to terminate it? Where am I going to get the seed? Stuff like that, just factors to be thinking about. So when we go back and these questions come up when it's time to implement the practice, we've thought it out and have the plan for it. Step number five, if you're interested in cost share, qualify for cost share, we'll look into those opportunities. Again, that's something that the conservation agronomist will be able to help you out with, and kind of explore personalized in your area, what fits for what your goal is. And step number six, the hardest part of them all, implement the plan. So you have this plan. It looks great on paper. Now we're going to go out and we're going to do it. The conservation agronomist team's here to help you go out and do it. And we're going to make sure that it's successful on your farm by utilizing all of our CFI. Lean on our CFI. We have the research, we have the analytics, we have the conservation expertise, we have the resources to put it all together. So as I mentioned, number six, implement the plan. Number seven, lean on our CFI. We have the resources, we have the information to make this as successful as we can be in your operation. So I'll give you a couple seconds to look at these steps here and kind of finish up writing down maybe a goal you have, again, maybe a goal that you think your neighbor should have, but just kind of putting your game plan together. All right, so as I mentioned, now we're just going to slide in and look at an example that a conservation agronomist here would do with a farmer when they reach out to us. So looking back at our 7 steps of building the game plan, number one, what is our goal? What's the goal in this scenario? If we look down in the short narrative part of here, it says the goal of implementing rye is to reduce soil erosion in the field. So my goal is reduce soil erosion in this scenario. That is our why we're wanting to implement this new practice, the why we're getting involved in conservation. Step 2 is reach out to a conservation agronomist. As you can see at the top of this page, the ISA contact, Farmer Ben reached out to Ryan Johnson, one of our conservation agronomists. Identifying that conservation agronomist, identifying the resource that's going to help you take this game plan from paper to field and be successful is step number 2. Step number 3, determine our solution. We've determined that in order to reduce soil erosion in this field, we are going to do cover crops. So don't pay too much attention to this 340-1. That kind of comes into the cost share aspect of things later. but we've decided that cereal rye is going to be the best method to reduce soil erosion in this specific scenario. Step 4 calls for developing a site-specific implementation plan, which is this page here. So we've taken our field, we've evaluated our crop rotation, our residue management, our nutrient management. We're going to implement cover crops aerially. It's going to be cereal rye. We know where we're going to get the seed. We know how we're going to terminate it. We know when we're going to terminate it. So these are all just considerations we take into account when we're building this plan, the site-specific plan. Not one thing is going to work across all sites for everybody. So really personalizing it to your site specifically is key here. Step 5 is to explore cost share opportunities. As you can see at the top of this page, this one's the North Raccoon Partnership for Soil and Water Outcomes Project. Again, personalized to you. We'll look at local programs, statewide programs, figure out what fits best for you. And after we've gone through these simple steps, now we're ready to implement the plan. Again, I cannot stress enough, lean on RCFI, the staff, tools, resources available here. We're here to help you maximize your farm's profitability while also helping you reach your sustainability and conservation goals. So with all that being said, what's your conservation game plan this year? We kind of went through and we wrote down what we thought that would be, but really be thinking as we move into this next cropping year, what is your game plan? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex Schaefer, a regional agronomist here with RCFI, and he'll preview some on-farm research opportunities and how to build your research game plan.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. And as Ben said, I'm going to go through some research opportunities. And so my name's Alex Schaefer. I am a research agronomist and I work in Northeast Iowa. So I'm not the only one. There's 4 of us, and we generally divide the state along the Interstate 35 and then Highway 30. So I'm in Northeast Iowa. Scott Nelson, who you heard speak earlier, he's our Northwest agronomist. Drew Clemenson is in the Southwest, and then Anthony Martin covers the Southeast part of the state. And really, when we talk about Joe's point of plan, do, check, and act, hopefully I got that in the right order. We are the boots on the ground that can help you plan and check. You're going to do most of the doing, the infield work, but the research agronomists and the conservation agronomists scattered throughout the state are a great resource in helping you work through that plan. So really, use this contact information that we're putting out there and get a hold of us, and let's put a plan together to either do some conservation work or some on-farm research. And I'll go into a couple examples next about things that we've learned in working with farmers on their farm, and some adjustments that could be made from this experimentation. So you can hit the next slide there. So this, hit it again there. Okay, this is perfect. This example is a situation where a farmer planted 2 different varieties of soybeans, and what we look when we look at this top left graphic here, the story would tell that on average, variety A yielded 64 bushel to the acre, and variety B yielded 57 bushel to the acre. So that might lead you down the path of, choosing variety A for your operation moving forward. But if you really dive into how the project or how the trial was set up and what was done, it may be a little bit, the result may be misleading. So if we look at the equal soils comparison here at the bottom, if you look at variety A on the left side of the field there, it was really only planted into high and moderate productivity soils. Okay, so then we look at variety B, it spans 3 different soil types, including the low productivity soil, and that really drug the average down. So this is why we really, when we're implementing on-farm research, we like field length alternating strips of whatever the practice is, so we can get a little bit better picture in that environment what the performance truly is. So and again, in this situation, if you really dig into the data, you would find that, variety B in general is going to be your better moneymaker than variety A in this example, considering the low productivity soils in this. And another, I don't have slides on this one, so bear with me, but this was kind of a fun one for me that we figured out this summer and working with a farmer. So his standard practice was to strip till in front of all of his corn acres. And when he was out strip tilling, he left a couple passes, he skipped over them with the strip till bar. So then he came back in the spring and he split his planter with 2 different hybrids. And so now all of a sudden we have 2 good trials that it's a strip till no till comparison with hybrid A and hybrid B. And when we dug into the data, he pulled in with the planter and as he planted through the no-till, he marked that in his as planted map, and the same for the strip till. So everything was well labeled, and we knew what we were working with out in the field, and it's a very important piece of the puzzle. But when we looked into the data, what we found is the hybrid from company A, I won't call anybody out here, but the hybrid from company A, its loss in going to no-till was about 10 bushels per acre, and hybrid B, it only lost about 4 bushels to the acre. So I haven't done the math on fuel and what it costs to run the strip till rig across the field, but I'm guessing that that 4 bushel loss that he took with hybrid A, the math would work out in your favor to move to no-till. And these are the kinds of answers that we can discover in doing some of the on-farm research that we're unbiased, and you're probably not going to figure that out anywhere else. So now I'll move into some of the trials that we have in place. We've gone through the why do on-farm research, and now I'll move into some of the topics. So this first slide, it's a pretty unique one, I guess. So relay cropping, I've been gifted this project from a predecessor, and it's really interesting to me because there's opportunity here to combine conservation work with agronomy and show immediate return on investment and conservation practices. So, briefly what relay cropping is essentially you take your cover crop of cereal rye and let it come to maturity, and you harvest it as shown in the picture here over the top of the soybeans. And then the soybeans are left to come to maturity, and you're harvesting 2 crops in the same season. So all the conservation benefits of cover cropping still apply in this scenario. That's where I say the intersection of conservation and return on investment is very tangible here, because then you also have that cereal grain harvest to add to your bottom line. So a couple of trends. So we've done this work for the past few years, and looking at data from 2020 through 22, some of the trends that are popping out that seem to be the most impactful on soybean yield is soybean relative maturity and the date of your cereal rye harvest. So the later your harvest is of your cereal rye, the more hurt that's going to put on your soybean yield, and the earlier your soybeans basically get into flowering. Really, we would like most of the flowering to happen after the rye has come off, to give those beans the most chance to put on more nodes and pods and then yield. So moving forward, 2024 is going to be a big expansion year of the project. So I think we're going to have another webinar on relay cropping here in the summer. But if this is something that interests you, you can reach out direct to me, and we can get you involved in a trial, either in 23 or 24. But 24 will be the big expansion. So we can go into the next year. So this project,
don't bore yourself with the details in the slide here. I'll kind of try and summarize it, but these are the objectives taken from a grant that we received from the NRCS. And really, I think why this project is pretty important, especially in this space of the webinar where we're talking conservation and research opportunities, is this project is a way for the Conservation Agronomist Network doing implementation work to cross paths with what we're doing in on-farm strip trials and that type of research, and influence community learning as well. So, you know, one of the things, this is in 2 project areas, which I'll show on a map on the next slide, but it's in Northeast Iowa and Southwest Iowa. And what it is we are trying to put groups of small farmers or small groups of farmers together in the same room, in-person meeting, you know, where we'll put together a plan on how to execute this on-farm research in a meaningful way that's going to give us good results moving forward, and, you know, helping to quantify some of those anecdotal things that we think we know about conservation practices, and then also influence the community on, you know, getting the data and the message out there. And, you know, one of the things that we think is small groups across the state drive engagement, you know, farmer to farmer interactions. They seem to be very, very valuable for farmers, and really, I think it comes down to the trust and the information they're getting. If they're getting it from a neighbor or somebody who's tried it, you know, their chances of going from zero adoption to trying something, I think, are greater, kind of hearing some of that story from their neighbors. So the other thing we've done with this project is we've tried to put a strong group of advisors together that can help you farmers work through some of those first year struggles, or, you know, learn the pro tips to kind of avoid the learning curve of adopting conservation. So, you know, ideally you come to a meeting and you get a chance to grill some professionals on, you know, with some of the hard questions around conservation, and walk away, you know, with some ideas on what you can do. And you know, we're looking for more participants always. And really, like I said, this is it's an intersection of our conservation agronomy implementation work, as well as our on-farm strip trials. So if you're a farmer that's kicking around the idea of implementing cover crops, you haven't done it, this would be a great way to get in the room with people that have, and get an idea what you need to do to be successful. So this next slide, this is just the map. So in order to participate, this project originally started, it was watershed based on the areas that we could operate in. So I'll be brief, but if you're in Northeast Iowa and you farm in any of these 6 counties, or Southwest, excuse my GIS skills, we don't dip into Missouri here, but if you're in that area, if you farm in that area, that would be Drew Clemenson down there, and then you can get in touch with me to participate in the Northeast. So that's kind of what that project's about. And then, so the trial options, again, they just have to be conservation based, and we would guide on, you know, some of the best options, but, you know, precision seeding, frost seeding, time of termination, nutrient management, strip till, no till, and then really open to farmer ideas on this one. We have sometimes too much flexibility, but yeah, we can take some ideas and run with it on this one. So, and then some key trials coming up, heavy recruiting going on right now. So our seeding rate trial, this one, to me, it's a good high value but entry level type trial, whereas we can generate a prescription for you at 4 different seeding rates, and kind of coach you through how to plant and harvest that plot. And it shouldn't take away from your efficiency too much at planting and harvest if we do well on our side here, getting you set up. And, you know, I would say as well, if you're if your seed salesman or seed agronomist is the guy telling you, the guy or gal telling you what seeding rate you should be applying in your field, you might be a good candidate for this trial, because this is, you know, it's unbiased research that we're gonna really try and hone in on in these different environments, what the most productive, the highest return on investment is for when it comes to seeding rate of soybeans. So if you've got a calibrated yield monitor and a planter that can record, you know, as planted data, that's all you need. Give us a call and we'll help you through setting up a trial. The blends, so this is something, we've got some camelina and cereal rye strips out from last fall. We'll see how the camelina did over the winter, but this is an example where we can take some of these knowledge plots that the CAs have put out, and we've identified a couple species that'll, you know, they'll do well out of an airplane, and over winter, that might be something that we then implement into on-farm strip trials, exploring new blends, and, you know, just try and move away from cereal rye a little bit and improve the carbon to nitrogen ratio and the biomass that's left. And then finally, we're working on some products for managing SCN. It's not as many locations, but if you know you have a problem or suspect that you have a soybean cyst problem and you want to test drive some products on your farm, we've got some stuff that we can provide, an indigo product and some Olivo and some other things. So if that's something you're interested in, again, reach out to any one of us at RCFI. I can get you to the right person, and yeah, get you really, we want to get you set up to learn something on your acres that will show return on investment somewhere down the line. So, and with that, I'll kind of turn it back to Ben here to close it out in our last couple minutes.
Yeah, so great stuff there, Alex. A lot of opportunity to get involved with RCFI, both on the conservation and research side. And again, it just goes back, you know, what's your game plan to participate with RCFI this year? As I mentioned, we have the tools, resources, the staff to really take your operation to the next level. And just please utilize us and reach out so we can be an assistance to you. With that, open it up for questions, comments, anything. And I'll put this map up here. That's a combination of the conservation agronomists and the regional agronomists and our contact information.
Well, thank you, Ben and Alex, for sharing that presentation. And we're at 11:55 here. I'm going to do a quick wrap up. If you do have questions, just type them in, and we can get back to anyone that's been on today and respond directly to you. Well, Ben, you stop sharing, and Joe's going to pull up the slideshow here on his screen. But also, I want to put in an advertisement. The fund continues in April, with a date to be determined. Planning for the field. Brandon Itting is going to talk. That's the edge of field practices, the oxbows, the saturated buffers, the bioreactors, some of the habitat work. So he's going to do a webinar in April, and then July, relay cropping tips and tricks, and you'll hear from Alex and Josh McDaniel, and hear about those opportunities in July. So next slide, Joe. Okay, just reminding folks about how to connect with us. You heard a lot of stuff today, and one way to engage with us, and as I said at the top of the meeting today, we're unique because of the assets we have internally, the investments that we make. We leverage the investment of the soybean checkoff for research and collaboration with a lot of other researchers. but we also secure other grants and program opportunities, and you heard a lot about those today. But if you go to that QR code on this sheet, you can go directly to our website, and this is our engagement form. And there's several of those opportunities listed. And again, don't hesitate to connect with us. We're happy to talk about new ideas that you have on your farm. As we said before, we think we're unique in the marketplace here because we're guided by farmer leadership, and our focus is very farmer centric, unbiased data and information. We lean forward with having sound data and information and research, and then helping the system improve. We're trying to find the frontier. You know, that's the innovation part of our name, and we're trying to drive continuous improvement on productivity, profitability, and sustainability. So you heard a lot of examples today. Next slide, Joe. Okay, that action plan. Ben gave out his telephone number and his email directly, and he's going to give you a couple gift cards if you take the time. If we were in person back in February, we were actually going to have a marketplace, and we were going to encourage people to fill this action plan out. We were instructing staff to take a picture of it, and engagement only happens if both parties actually talk to one another. So it's one thing to tell everybody everything that we do and all the good things, but we have to get better at engagement and scaling up these technologies. So, and very excited. Joe and I are both very excited to be leading this organization with such great staff and great information. So hope you enjoyed our virtual Innovation to Profit conference. And we look forward to seeing you again soon in person. Have a great day.